Hello and welcome to another edition of Miles to Go. I'm Miles O'Brien. So, do you ever wonder who or what determines what you see in your Facebook newsfeed? We've all been thinking a lot about this lately as Facebook faces an intense spotlight of scrutiny amid the rise of fake news and its impact on our political process. And for that matter, its role in the polarization and tribalization of the world in general. For the past year, producer Cameron Hickey and I have been investigating Facebook and fake news in general, although we prefer to use the less politically charged term junk news. As part of this project for the PBS NewsHour, the series will be rolling out in coming weeks. Stay tuned for that. We got some really unusual access inside Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park, California. While we were there, we spent some time with the director of analytics for the Newsfeed, Dan Zigmund. Dan is a Buddhist who practices intermittent fasting, meaning he does not eat anything for about 15 hours each day. He's the perfect person, I think, to explain how we are fed information by Facebook.
You did a nice, succinct primer on how it works. Give us the 101 primer on how the newsfeed works and how things that we see are selected.
Sure. So if you take all of the stories that have been posted by your friends, by pages that you follow, and then the other stories that maybe your friends have commented on or liked, gather all that together. For the average person, there's about 2,000 of those. So it's a lot of content that you could see. But most of us going to the newsfeed each day, probably only going to scroll through maybe around 200 of those stories. So one of our jobs on the newsfeed is to try to figure out how to rank those 2,000 stories so that it's likely that the ones you're most interested in are sort of towards the top. Because if you're not in that first 200, it's very unlikely that people are actually going to see the story. So a big part of it is figuring out what the right ranking is. And there's lots of ways that we could do that. For example, you might say maybe you should just rank it, from 1 to 2,000 based on which are the stories that you're most likely to click like on. Or you might want to rank it on what are the ones that you are most likely to comment on? Or maybe what are the ones that are likely to make you spend the most time on Facebook? And you might think at first glance, at first thought, all of those rankings would be about the same, but in fact they end up completely different. If you rank by time, you end up putting a lot of video towards the top because video is something that takes a lot of time to view. If you rank by likes, you end up putting a lot of public content on the top, news stories, professional celebrity kinds of pieces of content. If you rank by comments, you might see more baby photos and wedding photos and things like that. So the choice you make of how you rank these has a big impact on what people are actually seeing.
So all these criteria, 2,000 in the inventory, how do you decide which one of those things are, you're at the point where you're talking about how they're kind of at odds with each other.
Right. So these different metrics, these different ways of constructing a ranking algorithm are sort of at odds. And so in fact, we can't just choose one of them. We can't say, okay, we're just going to rank by time or we're just going to rank by likes, because we'd end up with a newsfeed that was just skewed very far towards one kind of content. So really what it comes down to is how you blend all these different signals of quality, of relevance together so that the most interesting things really do end up at the top and the things that people are less likely to want to see in their feed end up towards the bottom. It's a constant struggle to try to figure out what's the right weighting to give to each of these things. And over time, we've shifted between, maybe a little more of a weight on time or a little more of a weight on commenting. And that's a lot of what we're doing on Newsfeed.
So you've got time, commenting, likes, shares. I'm sure there's a few others.
Yeah.
What is ideally best for business at Facebook?
In the long run, what's best for business is to make the newsfeed that's most relevant to people. So, probably in very short-term terms, it would be to prioritize time. But, over the long run, if that means people are seeing a lot of things on Facebook that maybe they could see in lots of other places, because it's the maybe similar video content that they could get elsewhere, that might not be the best thing. Over the long run, it might be better to show people more of the kinds of friends and family content that they can't get anywhere else. So our priority really, what we're really trying to accomplish is giving people the feed that's going to make them like Facebook, get the most value out of it. And so the feed that's really right for them.
It's really a lot of variables at once.
It's a lot of variables at once, and there's a lot of factors. So, we also think about which of these ranking algorithms is going to, favor maybe content that people don't want to see in their feed. Things like clickbait, for example, which used to be a much bigger problem on Newsfeed. In some ways, you can think of it as an attempt to game the algorithm and get higher than people would really want it to be if they could sort of sit back and think about it.
I want to talk about clickbait, obviously, that's a big part of why we're here, but I am curious listening to this, is it possible to tweak the algorithm in an individual fashion? So if there is an individual that really just loves videos, they get videos, or does it have to be across the board?
So the way the algorithm works is really for each individual and each individual story, we make a set of predictions. So let's say for yourself, what's the likelihood for this story that you would comment or you would like, or if it's a video that you would watch that video? So if you're someone who watches a lot of video, then there's going to be a lot of videos for which your likelihood of watching is high. If I'm someone who just doesn't like to watch video at Facebook, then that number is going to be low for almost every video. So although the algorithm itself is not necessarily personalized, because these models are making different predictions for us, there's going to be more video in your feed and less video in my feed.
So the algorithm itself is blended as you speak, and then and it's very important then that you understand a lot about me in order to tailor that algorithm to my individual desires, right? That's what makes it custom.
That's right. So over time, we learn about each person's kind of preferences and their likelihood to do different kinds of things on the site. It may be that you're someone who just really loves baby photos, and so you tend to click like on every single one. That's then over time going to lead to us ranking those a little bit higher for you, and so you seeing more and more of those photos.
And this is akin to machine learning? It's just understanding a pattern of usage? Is that how it goes?
Yeah, so these underlying models are all machine learning models that are trained on the data that we collect on users every day, and then get better and better at predicting what those users are going to do in the future.
Okay, so you don't publish all these little nuances in specific fashion, but there are people out there who spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to game it. Tell us a little bit, has that been the case since day one, pretty much?
I mean, probably not literally from day one when it was just pictures of Harvard college students, right. but as soon as it became an important part of our kind of public conversation, an important place for people to share content more broadly, then people start trying to game it and figuring out how to get their content towards the top. And so part of the job in ranking is a little bit of a cat and mouse game of the people who are trying to game it and show people content that they might not really want to see. So trick us into thinking people want to see this content, and us trying to figure out what are the kind of authentic signals that we can find that are telling us what content people really want to see. So
I know it's hard to get too specific on this for a lot of proprietary and security reasons, but can you give us an idea of how you go about it?
Well, so we do lots of things. So first of all, we can figure out, are the predictions we're making actually correct? So let's say we think you like baby photos and we predict that you are very likely to actually, click like on the baby photos. But then we can compare that to the reality of when you see one, do you actually click like on it? And so we can basically calibrate our algorithms or evaluate our algorithms against what's really happening with our users. We also do surveys. So we will occasionally survey users and say, do you want to see this story in your feed? I can't remember the exact wording that we use. And so just get that subjective, did they think this was the right story to show them? We also often will have panels that where we bring in kind of professional raters of content and have them look at this content and say whether they think this is high quality content or relevant content, and compare that to what our models are saying we think this content is.
So the algorithm is never done.
The algorithm is never done, so we're constantly refining it. We probably at any given moment have dozens of ranking experiments that we're doing, which are sometimes small, sometimes larger tweaks to these weights, sometimes new signals that we're introducing to see if we can make it just a little bit better.
How does misinformation complicate your task?
Well, it complicates the task a lot. Because we are looking at all these different signals of engagement, one of the issues we face is that misinformation is often very engaging. So people don't create a lot of fake, boring stories. In general, if they're going to go through the trouble of creating a fake story, it's about something really interesting and exciting. And so those stories can get disproportionate amounts of engagement. People might click them more than they would click like a more staid kind of honest story. They might even, like it or share it or comment on it. Sometimes people even comment on it to say that they think it's misinformation. And so trying to understand that kind of engagement and separate that, what you might call bad engagement from good engagement, really complicates the process of building this algorithm.
There's that expression, truth is stranger than fiction. This is the opposite. Fiction is actually stranger?
Yes, often fiction is stranger than the truth, or at least a little more exciting.
So you sort of need a truth detector. And unless it's like an outright factual mistake, that gets really difficult as well, because there's a lot of shades of gray. There can be misleading headlines and yet an otherwise factual story, et cetera.
Yeah, so I mean, my team, for example, the data science team here, I mean, we don't really try to get into determining truth and falsehood. I mean, for one thing, we're operating in languages that none of us understand and could possibly read and dealing with topics that we couldn't possibly try to evaluate. So we're really looking for these signals, these universal signals that we can pick up that tell us whether this is something that's authentically engaging to people or something that's trying to game the system.
Can you share some of those signals, or is that like giving away the store?
So, I mean, one very concrete thing that we do is we do work with third-party fact checkers, and when they give us information that there's a hoax, then that's obviously a very clear signal, and we use that in the algorithm. But there's also more subtle signals. We find that if the people who share a story are generally people who haven't actually clicked on it and read it, then that's what we call sort of uninformed sharing, versus if people who share the story are all people who have actually read the story, which we call then informed sharing. That's a pretty good sign. If the fact that you clicked on the story actually then makes you less likely to share it, then that's a signal that there was something about the story that, if it wasn't misleading, it was at least sort of disappointing or not what you thought it would be. And so that can be a sign that the story is inauthentic.
So maybe there's a lot of people just sharing headlines. The headlines are great. They don't bother to read the story, which probably doesn't support the headline, right?
Exactly. So you do have these situations with a headline that's misleading or exaggerated, and then when people click through, they realize that and they sort of lose interest. And so the fact that most of the people sharing are not people who clicked through is a good indication that something like that might be going on.
What I've realized here is that a lot of what you do is psychology, and there's a certain component here of human nature. It's like, wow, I've got to share this. It's like, I want to do this right this minute. And can you build an algorithm that anticipates that?
Well, as I said, one of the risks of any ranking algorithm like this that's based on engagement is that engagement can be misleading. And we probably have all had that experience, a little bit like eating junk food or something like that, where, what you do is not what you might think you'd want to do if you could kind of step back and be a little more thoughtful about it. And so, trying to make sure that we're not just catering to this like instant gratification, the need to just keep clicking, that we're actually delivering things that people, if they could step back and think about what they'd like to read today, would be the set of things they'd like to see. That's a big part of our challenge.
And that goes back to that question I posed you, but I just want to just one more time at it. Clicking is good for business. And so it's in a sense, it's right. I mean, essentially, right. You want people to click through stories, click through ads, et cetera. So it does kind of fly in the face of the short-term profit, right?
But we're very focused on the long term. I do think in the long run, we want Facebook to be a place where people are finding relevant and engaging things and where they feel they're getting authentic, true information. Because in the long run, if they don't think that, there are other places they can go spend their time. And so we worry much more about ensuring that it is that platform for authentic communication and less about just like exactly what's happening day by day in terms of how much time or how much they're clicking.
So you guys don't feel a lot of like quarterly report kind of pressure then?
We have a pretty good division of labor between the folks that are out there selling ads and worrying about that and those of us who are building the core application and ensuring that that's just a really compelling place for people to spend their time. And I think that enables us to really be very focused on the long term.
It's interesting you were talking about, I said day one, and you were, Harvard Pictures, which is, after all, how it began. Obviously, what it is today is so hard to even, from point A to point B is pretty astounding. How much of a sense of responsibility is there felt inside this building, given the fact that 2 billion people, multiple countries, use this as a public square? Does that change the game significantly?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, many of us, including myself, have worked in the startup world where you have, no users or, a handful of users, and you can kind of do what you want. You can change it completely from one day to the next, and you don't feel any great sense of responsibility. You're absolutely right. We're working on something that 2 billion people all around the world are using as a source of information, as a way of connecting with family and friends. And it's a huge responsibility and something that I think about all the time. there's never really been a time in human history where someone like me could have any impact on what 2 billion people were seeing. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that trust and trying to be as thoughtful and deliberate as we can about these changes we're making to ensure that we're honoring that trust and that we're giving people the best experience we possibly could.
This is unprecedented in every way, isn't it?
It is, and we're really trying to be thoughtful stewards of that.
Should you've said responsibility quite a bit. Is the company doing enough, do you think?
We could never do enough. I think we're doing as much as we can. I come in and work on this every day, but it's never going to be enough. We could always do better, and I think all of us want to just keep doing better. Is it
as you start trying to dial things in such a way to eliminate the misinformation as best you can, is it frustrating, this kind of cat and mouse component?
It can be, and it's not always clear what the right set of trade-offs are. We worry about, on the one hand, we don't want too much misinformation. On the other hand, we really don't want to be taking things away from people that they want to see, that they want to share. If you've got some article that you're really excited about and you want to share it with your friends, we're weary of getting in the middle of that and saying, maybe that's not something that they should be seeing. So it's a tricky balance, and we're always trying to find that right point where we're being responsible but never censoring anybody.
It's tough because I suppose you'd be tempted just to take some stuff down and delete it.
Well, of course, things that are extreme, that violates our community standards, our basic terms of service. I mean, we do take things down that are harmful, hateful, pornography, things like that. But there's a huge gray area. And I guess one of the things I've come to appreciate is really a lot of it is in that gray area where we have to be very careful and thoughtful.
So better in the company's view, it would be better to put it at item 2000 than delete it.
Yes. So I think when we use ranking as a way of kind of reducing something's distribution, it means that the people really who most want to see it, still have it there. They can still find it. It's not being taken out of the sort of the public square, but it's not being sort of pushed on people who may actually not want to be seeing that kind of material.
Yeah. If you don't do that, I guess everybody has the same size megaphone, and that's not historically how we, the fringe stuff has been at the fringe historically, and now what you're doing is by using an algorithm, putting it at the fringe virtually, I suppose.
I think that's right. I think, we're trying to ensure that fringe content isn't getting disproportionate distribution because it has found some way of gaming this system of engagement.
Facebook says it is a technology company, not a media enterprise. And as such, it doesn't want to step into the role of being an editorial arbiter. But it is trying to refine its algorithm and put the stuff on the fringe, which is to say at the bottom of your newsfeed. The term is downranking, and Dan Zigmund explained it.
So I talked about this ranking algorithm where we've got signals like time and comments and likes and all kinds of other things, like, is the person who shared this a good friend of yours? Is it someone that you almost never interact with? Is it from a news site that maybe you spend a lot of time reading, or one that you hardly ever see? So that gives you some ranking. If we find a piece of content that we have some reason to expect is misinformation, maybe because a third-party fact checker has flagged it, then essentially what we do is we take the usual ranking score and we multiply it by some fraction so that it falls down in that ranking. What that means is that if this was a piece of content that was already, let's say it was number 1 on your list, even after that down ranking, it still may be in that top 1 or 200, and so you may still see it. So it's not that nobody will see it. But if it was maybe something a little more marginal, maybe from a distant friend or, a long-lost cousin that you don't actually spend that much time engaging with, and it was towards the bottom of that list, then it may well then drop below the line where you're very unlikely to see it. And in that way, we end up reducing the distribution of this misinformation without flat out banning it from the system.
So is it working? You've been fiddling with it quite a bit of late.
So I think it's making a lot of progress. I think we're doing a lot better. I don't think we're seeing nearly as much misinformation on the site as we've seen before. But of course, we'd rather have no misinformation on the site. And so, we're not done. And I think we're still looking for, first of all, better signals of what is misinformation, and then always refining these ranking changes to ensure that we're getting that down ranking exactly right.
Is there any way you can quantify, give me some metric for how you know it's working?
So I think we find that once like a third-party fact checker has flagged a piece of content as misinformation in our system, the distribution drops by about 80%. So we think that's pretty good. Some of the things that maybe aren't as good as we'd like is it takes longer for content to be flagged than we'd like. And sometimes it does get a lot of distribution in those early days when it's first out there. And then we're always refining, is 80% the right reduction? Should it be reduced by 90%? Trying to ensure that we're getting that balance exactly right too. That's a never-ending process.
The process of fact-checking sounds great, but it does take time. That's really the rub here, as everything spreads instantly before anyone has a chance to weigh in on what's factual and what's not. There's that famous quote you're probably familiar with, "A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes." It's widely attributed to Mark Twain, and I thought he coined it as a matter of fact. But after some careful fact-checking on my own, it's now clear to me Twain did not invent that phrase. Most likely, it was first said by the famous English satirist Jonathan Swift in the early 18th century. Factual errors, fake news, rumors, and lies have always been with us. What's changed is the instantaneous global reach. The truth can't even get out of bed in time to stop a lie anymore. Please check out our series on junk news appearing on the PBS NewsHour in the coming weeks, and sign up for my weekly newsletter on all things science and technology. We do spend a lot of time checking facts, by the way. MilesO'Brien.com is the place to go to learn about all of this. I'm Miles O'Brien. This has been Miles to Go. Thanks for listening.